Welcome back to another episode of the Unblock Your BS podcast. During the course of doing this work, there are people who come into my world via DMs or who come on as clients where I end up recognizing there's not a whole lot of work for us to do together, right? Where we kind of come up with maybe some action plans, but often, honestly, there's sometimes where I'm like, I think you're actually doing really good, or I don't think that the work that we could do together would ultimately be worth the price of investment. So thanks. Let's move on. Or let me give you a different resource or direction to go. And today's podcast guest is one of those where he booked a call with me. He very much wanted the female perspective on a healing journey he'd already been on. And the man was super self-aware, was super like self-reflective, knew his blind spots, had done already a lot of work. And so while maybe there might have been a little bit of insight, he seems to think there was from that session. In some ways, that's not who I mean, I can serve those people, but I like to make sure that if we're going to do work together, that there is a radical, at a minimum, return on investment, both in the time and the money that you invest. And in the case of my good friend Paul, that wasn't the case. I didn't feel like there was a whole lot as far as working together consistently that we could really dive into because he had reached such a high level of self-awareness. And so after I think it was probably a couple of months, we had kind of exchanged DMs, just checking in, how you doing? He would ask me a few questions, I'd answer him. But we kind of developed a friendship over that and a kind of a common understanding that like there aren't many people that think the way that we do and perceive relationships and have this mutual understanding of the healing work. And so we've developed a friendship from being, client and coach to now being friends. And I wanted him to come on and share what his journey has been like because there is so much of who he was before he embarked on this journey that I think so many men and even like women married to these types of men would recognize in themselves. Where on the outside and from an outsider's perspective, everything looked like you're living the American dream. I mean, they were going on vacations. They had reached major success in their careers. He's a former professional athlete. They live in a very affluent neighborhood in California. They have 4 beautiful children who get along great. They're thriving in sports and in school. She is a doctor. She's very successful in her career. Like from the outside and on paper, they are crushing life, like the things the American dream is made of. And yet, on the inside, relationships started to crumble. The marriage was struggling. The kid, his relationship with one of his children was so significantly different than the other 3. And so he would start to ask himself, why do I connect so easily with 3 of these kids, but not the 4th? Why am I reactive instead of present? Why do I default to getting anger or upset over something as opposed to curious? And it wasn't until he started digging into this stuff by way of his wife encouraging them to go to couples therapy that he kind of had the aha moments of what parts of his past were starting to rear their ugly head and how resistant he was to actually getting into the work or going into childhood, where he thought he had resolved and made peace with the circumstances in which he grew up with. But no, no, no. As he started to dive into that work, and we'll get very clear on what the work is, this is where most of his transformations and ahas have come from, where not only has he been able to repair and heal a lot of relationships that were struggling, but now he actually has found purpose in helping other men with this. So we talk about the moment he realized that quote unquote man up wasn't working for him, even though that's exactly how his grandfather had treated him, who had helped raise him. He reframed deep childhood wounds, including never meeting his dad and being abandoned by his mom at the age of 8. He's turned that into gratitude and having an understanding for what his parents were going through at the time when his mom was pregnant with him versus when he was a little boy. And the exact skills he has used to be able to create emotional safety, which was something he had no concept of what that meant when his wife came complaining to him that she didn't feel emotionally safe, and how that also impacted how he showed up for his kids. And he talks about this generational inheritance that his kids are now going to get because he did the work of being able to have emotional mastery, nervous system regulation, and to understand himself at a deeper level so he can be a rock and a steady presence for the members of his family and those around him. So if you've ever tried to fix everything and you still felt disconnected, this episode is for you. I cannot wait for you guys to hear Paul's story and actually see in real time what it looks like on the other side of embarking on a healing journey. Because I know I get DMs all the time that there's a lot of men who are worried that if they start to pop open this can of worms that they've been holding on to for so long, what is the point? Is it even worth it? And Paul is a great example of what the benefit is in doing some of this work that might radically blow your world wide open, but in the best possible way, because we have truth, we have authenticity, and we have better relationships moving forward. So let's get into today's episode with Paul Coleman. All right, Paul, welcome to the Unblock Your BS podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Tara.
Yeah, I am so excited for you to come on and specifically share the journey that you've been on for roughly about 2 years now, right? Can you explain what led you to kind of looking into what we call a healing journey and where that started for you?
So it started, how much time do you have?
I mean, we got like an hour. I don't know.
Yeah. So it started kind of in the household, just small debates or fights or conflicts in the household, whether it be with my kids or with my wife, and kind of trying to understand why I'm showing up certain ways in those conversations, and trying to take accountability and awareness for why the conversation didn't go well, or why do I have connection with these 3 kids, but no connection with this kid. So the journey kind of started as relationships started falling apart in the household, and I realized something needed to be done. So I think it's kind of that Zoom era, post-COVID. So the first 2 therapists I started with were via Zoom. And I don't think I ever felt super comfortable or built a good enough relationship with those therapists to kind of dig in to myself and my childhood. A lot of them pushed me, like, have you met your dad? Like, what was your childhood like? And I was like, not having it. Super suppressive, I've dealt with it. Leave me alone. I've never met my dad, but it's motivated me to be here today, and I'm going to show up as the best dad and the best husband because of it. And I think while you're anchored and while you feel good in your relationship, that works to a certain extent. That's shoving the emotions down and using it as motivation. Mm-hmm. But when conflict starts to arise and the surface starts to fall out from underneath you and you both don't feel secure in that relationship anymore, some of that childhood stuff will come up to bite you. And in those conversations, I couldn't figure out for the life of me is like, why do I have this pit in my stomach? Why do I hear abandonment? Why do I feel unloved? Like, this is a person that is supposed to be my person. I've known her since I'm 14 years old. Why am I showing up with these feelings? Why am I getting quick to anger with my kids? Why am I, quick to raising my voice? Why can't I sit there and respond versus react? So just a long answer to your short question is just the relationships in the household. You start to notice how you're showing up, and it really drove me to do the work with the first 2 therapists. But like I said, because it was doomed and because I didn't feel connected or trustworthy enough with those therapists, I never really got into the depth of it until we went to couples counseling. In couples counseling, we'll just say my wife started to, instead of coming out directly and saying, I feel this way, said, hey, you're doing this stuff with the kids and it doesn't feel emotionally safe, or it doesn't feel, or they're not coming to you anymore. They're scared to come to you because if they say, hey, so-and-so hurt me, you're going to react. So it clicked right away with the kids. I didn't realize that she was being super smart and saying it in a nice way to not hurt my feelings. Like, hey, you do this with me too, or you shut me down, or you raise your voice quickly. But yeah, she kind of used the kids and was like, they're not coming to you anymore. So the therapist that we were with, I trusted her. She was my personal therapist before our couples therapist. And she recommended some books. And that's when it clicked. I read a few books. I know one that sticks out, Parenting from the Inside Out. I read it, and it wasn't so much my childhood trauma that came up in that. It wasn't so much that. It was more of a click of why I show up reactive. And I grew up with a Navy man, never met my dad, went through 2 stepdads. Mom left me with my grandma and grandpa at 8 years old. And I didn't know how much resentment and anger I had built up from all of that. But the suppressing the emotion, the man up, you're not allowed to cry, suck it up, man up. I mean, I didn't even grow up with a boomer. I grew up with another generation above that. And my grandpa was a military man and Navy guy, and he was not having any of that sappy emotional BS. So I realized growing up with him is where, if I got hurt as a child, if heaven forbid, I mean, I was a very good athlete. And if I got hurt, it was like, God damn it, Coleman. That was the first thing out of his mouth. It wasn't, how are you? Are you okay? Show me what's injured. There was no empathy for me. It was just straight to anger, straight to loud. And so I kind of realized, like, wow, I'm kind of parenting like him. That's awful, because it made me feel awful as a kid. And I stopped going to him. I started going to my grandma and be like, hey, it kind of hurt my arm. I don't think I could pitch tomorrow. And she was my safe space instead of going to him. So when I read that book and that kind of clicked for me, it was like, okay, there's something to all this. Like, I really need to dig into my childhood. And at that time, I was also in 2 men's programs. And they were pushing for me to dig into the men's stuff. And I finally got to a point in time where a therapist couldn't tell me. I eventually had to say, I want to do the work, and I want to do it for me, and I want to do it for my kids, and I want to show it better for everybody in my life. So that's really when I started getting into the work and realizing what I needed to do.
Yeah. Talk to me about what the work means, at least from your experience of it. Because I know a lot of people say, do the work, and there's this big, vague concept of where do you even start? So what is the work?
What is the work? I think that's a very broad question. And you could go down a bunch of different routes, which I have. Embarrassingly, I will show you. It's about a 600-page journal over the last 2 years of the work.
With color-coded tabs, no less.
Yeah, some of it is, parenting and, building trust and emotional safety. And some of it's conflict resolution. Some of it's childhood trauma. So I have a tab for each one of kind of where I went through the work. So I think the work is a combination of self-awareness and accountability. Where do I need to show up better? And unless you really work with a coach or work with someone who can identify the issues, you really don't know where to start. So couples therapy for me, when the couples therapist came and laid out like, hey, these are 30 things that a great relationship has. And I'm reading through it and I'm like, excuse my language, but I was like, I don't know what 10 of these things are. And that's when I started to realize my emotional intelligence, and that's a skill. That's tools you can put in your toolbox and learn. So for me, I was super motivated because I was like, okay, we're not broken. This isn't broken. I just haven't showed up in the best way because I don't have these skills. And for me as an ex-athlete, I was like, I'm going to put the work in, because when you put the work in, you get results. And it's worked for me in my whole career. It's worked for me in my athletic life. I pushed my athletic career to the professional level. I pushed my real estate career into the top 1% of earners in California. So for me, it was like, if I just bear down and do the work, I'm going to figure this thing out. But I didn't know where to start. So that's where the coaching really came in. And I even called you. I think I called you. We did a few sessions, but I had already been in the work for 6 to 8 months. And the thing that I think really, because we kind of turned into a friendship after that, the thing that really made me feel comfortable and willing to learn and share with you was that you realized I've already gone through a lot of the work. And you were like, man, your story's great. I'm learning from you too. Like, it wasn't a push of, okay, sign up for these 10 sessions. It was like, man, I've already seen the growth you've had. Like, and you were kind of very supportive of the journey and very supportive of the work. And that's when I started to realize, like, you weren't the first person to say it, but my couples therapist too said, you're going to be in my chair one day, helping other people. And then I think in our second session, you were like, I'm proud of you. You've done a lot of work. Like, I think you missed your calling, I think is what you said.
Yeah.
Um,
I was like, you could do this,
yeah. So I don't do it. I do real estate full time, but I have started coaching a few men and brought on a few friends and stuff that have been going through stuff, just on family and fatherhood. Um, but yeah, I think the work is you have to have somebody who knows what they're doing to kind of help you build that awareness and accountability for. I kind of went through it all. I'm a little crazy on the work. So I kind of went through it all. But for me, until I went through the childhood trauma stuff, I was stuck. I was never going to get to where I am today. I was never going to be able to heal those wounds. And I didn't even realize it until talking with my wife. Like some of the conversations with my mom, I would just, she'd talk forever and I would put her on speaker and go do something and be like, checked out, not present, not there for her. Not, just listening to be someone to listen, but I wasn't listening with empathy or listening to engage or with curiosity. So the relationship always felt cold. The relationship always felt distant. And I didn't realize that because she had left when I was 8 years old, I was scared. I was scared to get close to her. I was scared, be abandoned again. So I don't want to get close to this person because she's left me before. And bless my mom's heart, she's gone through the work too. And she started to revamp some of the past, and she's really helped me get in touch, figure out who my dad was. And I told her she didn't need to be on this journey with me, but I at least needed his last name. I didn't even know my dad's last name until March. So that was the real turning point and maybe it was February, where I'm going to go all in and I'm going to figure out my story. And I think that's when the real work began, because all the resentment, all the anger, the lack of forgiveness, the lack of trust with parents, it all melted away once I got down to the root and the story. And once I was able to reframe some of those actions that my parents took. And it was so crazy because the answers were sitting right in front of me. I just wasn't willing to do the work. Like my therapist and our couples therapist, she did her thesis on childhood trauma and overcoming it. And she told me about this whole journey about tracing down her heritage and figuring out why her dad abandoned her and figuring out all this stuff. And I just, over my head, I was like, why would you do all that? Like, you're a therapist. I guess that's why you did all that. But it didn't really click until I started to go through it. And I was like, we'll just tell the story. So I never met my dad, and I couldn't figure out why I didn't want to meet him, or why I didn't have any curiosity, or why I avoided it. And I couldn't get rid of that anger and resentment until I heard the story from my mom. My mom shared with me, I think it was in February or March, that she was 19 years old. Obviously wasn't expecting to have a baby. They weren't married, and his family was very religious and pushing for an abortion. So my mom made a very hard decision, which I love my mom for now. I'm going to raise this baby alone. I'm going to do it myself, and I'm going to honor their word. I'm going to not tell them about, or I'm not going to tell Paul about his dad, and I'm going to raise him. And it kind of clicked at that moment for me. My mom went into something so unknown and so hard for a single mom at 19 years old with no career and nothing to stand on, because she didn't want to abort me. And then when you're able to go back and reframe that and say, okay, she put herself in an extremely difficult situation. And when she realized it wasn't working at 8 years old, she asked my grandparents for help, and they graciously took me on. So once I'm able to reframe, now I'm grateful to be raised by my grandparents in a safe home with, good economics and a polarity dynamic of father and mother, even though they're my grandparents. And then to realize that the other option was, I'm not here today. So being grateful just to be alive and being grateful that my mom was brave enough to make that decision to allow me to have this journey today. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have a wife and 4 beautiful kids and everything I have today if she didn't make that decision. So instantly, the anxiety, the fear, the anger, all the emotions that were behind that childhood trauma were reframed into gratefulness. And I'm blessed to be here and I'm lucky to be here. So that reframe was really the starting point on this healing stuff really works. Like this growth, this work, this journey, it's really about me now. It's really about how I show up for other people. And at first, obviously, we were going to therapy and couples therapy to try to work on dynamics in the house and relationship stuff and conflict resolution and alignment. And then I finally realized the work is about so much more. It's about me finding my own self-love, me getting back to my purpose, me letting go of all my resentments and forgiveness, and finding my dad. I wrote him a letter, offering him forgiveness, telling him I understand the position he was in, and even saying if he didn't respond, if he'd never told his family, like that could create some really bad conflict if he's lied to his wife for 20, 30 years. So it was like, I even had the awareness to where if he didn't reach out and get back to me, it's okay, because he's living a life that he may not have totally told the truth, and they may not even know that I exist. But being able to have that letter written, I think it was like a 2 or 3 page letter, being able to explore his family in my, half brothers and stepmom, and look at them online with social media now. I could look all the way back like 15, 20 years and kind of see everything. It was kind of cool. It's kind of cool journey to go on. And I went from the 8-year-old boy that hated the question of, where's your dad? Where's your mom and dad? Like, why do you live with your grandparents? Like that anger and that angst and that anxiety is just melted away now. And now I'm just grateful, and I live every day present. I'm not living in that past anymore. So really digging in and resolving some of those past traumas really helped me kickstart my growth journey. And it was something that therapists tried to get me to do. I just didn't have the trust of these online therapists. And I think until you're ready to do the work, men, for you that need to do the work, jump in, because we're the only ones. Your wife's not going to push you to do it. Your kids aren't going to push you to do it. Even your therapist at times is not going to be able to push you to do certain things. You're going to have to want to do it for yourself. So that's really where the work began. But there is, like you saw from the notebook, there is chapters and chapters of different kinds of work. Yes.
Yeah. It really is a choice. And that's something that I very much, because I have calls before anybody joins the program, that this is not quote unquote easy, right? You're already doing the easy thing by avoiding, numbing, repressing, just staying the same. In order to heal, sometimes it can get worse before it gets better when we start to actually get to the root of where all these behaviors are coming from, because they're really just protective mechanisms that we develop through childhood and then into our adult relationships that keep a part of us that is tender or painful or traumatic, that we have these defense mechanisms. For you, it might have been the reactivity, right? Or shutting down or blocking connection because, oh my gosh, if somebody actually got to know what really hurts me, then they're going to hurt me, right? And those stories that we tell ourselves. And so I like to look at the work. It's almost like if you look at AA, it's first recognizing we have a problem. So we can look at our external world. Where are things not going well? I specifically focus on when relationships don't go well, because they're a beautiful mirror for the work that you need to do, not what your partner needs to do, despite what you might think. And then it's really, like you said, learning those skills and tools that you lack only because you never learned them, not because they're wrong, you're broken, you don't know how to do this, you're a fuck up. Like there's none of that. That's just the stories that you create from childhood. But if you can start to learn these tools and skills, and I think there is very much a component of trust to make sure that you're in a safe space to learn these things, because it's going to get messy, right? As you're learning and navigating, it's like a baby learning to walk. You're going to fall until you develop the skill set to be able to stand on your own. And I think that's where a lot of men struggle, is maybe they have an awareness of where they lack the skills and tools, or they don't know what skills and tools. But what does it mean about them if they don't know how to fix a problem in their relationships? And I think that's one of the biggest objections I run into in men wanting to work with me or even doing this work is, what does it mean about me if I can't fix this because I have this identity as a fixer? So how did you navigate that of even just like an ego component of I should know how to do this, or I shouldn't have to ask for help, or what does it mean about me if I need to do work and I need to ask for help that I don't know how to do this?
Well, how did I get to that point? I think you kind of hit kind of spot on. You have to let go of um, the ego and the pride, um, because there was so much outside influence and so many people telling me I was a great dad or a great husband. Um, I let that gaslight me, even in therapy. Like therapists sometimes would be like, "You're going to sit in my chair one day. You've read all the books. You're learning all the stuff." Like I let it gaslight me into thinking it was somebody else's problem to fix.
Yeah.
Um, and even then I started reading the books and it was like, oh, if we could only do this, it'll fix it. If she would do this, it would fix it. And it was like, that's not the way to go about it. First of all, trying to fix anyone is not the way to go about
I
it.
try regularly. It doesn't work.
Yeah. So the only thing we could really be responsible for is fixing ourselves.
Yeah.
Cleaning up our own side of the street, working on what we have gone through and taken accountability for, and have the self-awareness to show up and be like, okay, these are the things I'm missing. And I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to try to get there. And growth isn't linear. Like sometimes think I have it figured out and be like, oh shit, that didn't work. Back to the drawing board. So linear. And I worked with, like I said, multiple different men's coaches who I'm grateful that I'm here today because of all of them. And they all had coaches. I did at one point in the journey. I think when I first reached out to you, I was like, man, I work with men all the time. I need the feminine perspective here. Like, and that's where I thought you were really good at working with men, but seeing it from the feminine lens. Because when you don't get that side of it, I really didn't understand the world you guys have to navigate, the world you live in. And until you can see both sides, I could do all the work on myself as possible, but to have true empathy and really validate you and really understand what you're going through, it was great to just, we started off as a client relationship working, and then it kind of turned into a friendship. And I really got to dive in and see the feminine perspective. And it was awesome.
Because I started being more vulnerable. That's why I moved into a friendship. I was like, I think I can trust you with some of this stuff and, not have to keep that wall up.
Yeah.
That was valuable for me too, to understand even just having this perspective of what men come to me for is looking at it from a different lens that other men may not be providing for them. And that's been really interesting because I think the way that I translate both the woman's experience and can understand a man's experience and find that bridge between the two worlds and the two ways of thinking to find what's that common ground and how do you move forward. At least that's what the feedback that I've gotten.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I do think it's super valuable. And I'm not saying it's better one way or the other. I'm just the person that if I'm going to go all in on the work, I'm going to go all in. And only hearing it from the male perspective, it was very great, and I got through the work. But then there was just something that struck me that was like, I really don't understand, some of the stuff that goes on in today's world, as far as politics or religion or patriarchy or just certain things that women are dealing with in the workplace. Obviously I wake up every day and I kind of feel the same every day. You guys wake up every day, and depending on where you're at in that 28 days, it could be different. It could be this.
Or our age. I didn't understand. Hormones are just.
Yes. Yeah. And as men, I don't want to say we overlook it, but we take it for granted that we get to wake up every day and our body kind of feels the same every single day. Yeah. Unless we're dealing with an injury or emotional trauma or cortisol spikes. So it was really eye-opening to learn it from another lens, and learn that we're different and we see the world different. That was one of the biggest eye-opening things to me, is like, I have the advantage of being a white male in America. And it's like, I never really saw it from a female perspective. Like, And I started reading books on it and reading Invisible Women and reading just multiple different books about how, testing, even coming down to like, let's say safety in a car, all those test dummies are done on men. The test dummies are all males. Like all the medicine trials they're starting to do it on women, but for the last 40 years are done on men. Um, Viagra that was originally to help with the, female cycle. And then it turned into a male drug and they made a bunch of money off of it. Like just seeing how all these drugs and tests and everything were all done on a male perspective without really testing it on females or really taking into account their perspective. It was kind of eye-opening, and reading those books really led me to think like, okay, I've done this work from the male perspective. What am I missing from the female perspective? What are they feeling? What are they going through? What are they teaching that the males aren't teaching?
And we don't even know because it changes all the time, or it just changes so rapidly. Like the exposure that women have had to new opportunities, just even since the Me Too movement, with the, social media becoming more popular, we're finding communities. We're able to communicate with other women who maybe share similar experiences. None of that was happening in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Women couldn't get a bank account without their husband until the 1970s. So it's very
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, when I found
years ago,
this makes sense. Because a lot of people, I find a lot of men are wildly confused as to what has changed between what they witnessed growing up in the traditional roles of women being the homemakers and men being the providers, and then we're modern day society. And there's two different paths that men take. Either they're very resistant to it, which nothing wrong with that. Just go find a woman that wants that too. Or there's men that really want to understand, like you, who are like, okay, educate me on this because I didn't have that experience, or how I was raised was very different. And whether it's right or wrong to have traditional roles, whatever those are, whatever you want to make them up to be, it's really truly coming down to understanding your partner. And I think that was a big thing for you, is like you're genuinely trying to understand your wife's experience and where her complaints or her struggles were and what she was reading and what she was consuming, so that you could have this deeper understanding, not from a place of defensiveness, but okay, educate me. Like I'm open to understanding it. And also women don't even know, right? Like I study this stuff. I'm looking for patterns of society and how we got to this point. But ultimately what I see it is that women don't necessarily need the protection and the providership that men were raised of our generation to raise, as that's your value, right? You bring the money, you put the food on the table, you protect us if we're being attacked. Most women are not in physical situations where they're attacked, although we're still wired for that. Right. My mom and my best friend have my location. So when I go on dates, I say, hey, I'm going on a date so they can track me. Right. When I go out for a walk with my dog, I'm very mindful of don't go down certain streets, or, if there's a van driving by, I'm just aware of it. And it's things that men probably just aren't even considering. And when I had a post on social media, one man said something like, well, that's great and all that women don't think they need protection, but this is a dangerous world. So just wait, as in like it's inevitable for a woman to get attacked. And my thought was, you see, this is where you're missing it. You think the attacks are coming from outside the home. The biggest threat to women is who they're sharing a home with, right? Not always, right? That's not every man, but that really is when we cohabitate with a man. That's the most vulnerable we're at, not walking in a parking lot, although that's true as well. And so it's just kind of looking at, if we don't have that emotional safety piece, which I think is where men are getting really confused of what is emotional safety? Like, how do I provide that for a woman? Or is that even necessary for me to provide for a woman? I'm not a woman, so I don't know emotions. That to me is the missing piece, that when you can understand what emotional safety is, you can have a woman who thrives in that, and you can also thrive in that, because you can't provide that emotional safety for somebody else unless you can do that for yourself. So your own exploration of this concept of emotional safety, what does that look like for you? How do you create it for your kids? How do you create it for yourself? What does it mean?
So I think for me, and that was one of the biggest complaints. And I didn't even understand, like, I don't feel safe in the relationship, or I don't feel seen or heard. And I was like, I
see
really
you, I
don't
hear you.
understand.
I'm not abusive,
Yes.
right?
Like, I'm a good person. I'm supportive. You're a doctor. I'm taking the kids to school. I'm helping out. I'm doing my majority at home. And I was like, how do you not feel seen or heard? Like, I've been pro, you know, pro
But
work.
they've
Like
tried.
you go girl, do your job. Super proud of her. Like almost to the point of nausea where people used to be like, stop bragging about your wife. Like, but she's super successful in her profession, you know, athletic, um, great mom. So it was like always bragging. And I was like, I didn't understand until I started doing the work that's like you said, that was, I have molded from the old generation where it was like, I provide, I work, I bring home a paycheck and blam. The household, you know, she'll never complain about how I've stepped up as a dad or how I've stepped up as, um, you know, 4 kids under 4 at one point. Yeah, bottle feeding, diapers, like grocery shopping, laundry, what you name it, doctor's appointments, dentist appointments. I'm present. I'm just a very present dad, and I'm there, and I coach them, and I show up every day for them. So I don't think that would ever be the complaint. So I couldn't figure out for the life of me when it was like I don't feel safe, until I started really digging in and figuring out what that meant. Um, and a lot of it is just like I said, the way I show up. She can't feel safe if I'm showing up mirroring her. If she's emotional on this wave and I'm mirroring it and I'm not calm and grounded and present and willing to listen and, like I said, react was my go-to. If I'm not able to sit there and respond or just listen, sometimes they don't want you to fix anything. They just want to
A
listen.
lot of times. A lot
A
of
lot
times
of
they don't want
times.
you to fix.
Correct. And that was my thing is like I was always a fixer because as a kid, and I think we've talked about this before, I would always perform for love.
Yep.
So it's like I could fix it. I could do it. Academically excelled, athletically excelled. And that's when my parents would say, I love you or I'm proud of you. Or so I learned that if I do, I earn love. And if I do, I can fix things. And I was doing everything. I mean, vacations, go part-time, buy every trip, go on every vacation. You know, we, from the outside looking in, it's like, man, they have it all. But the emotional safety part for me was you really had to dig in and say, okay, it's because when things started to fall apart, I showed up with fear of abandonment. I let my emotions control me. I wasn't a calm, grounded, present person. I was living in the future, like, oh my gosh, what happens if we don't fix this? What happens to our kids? Or living in the past and saying, you said these bad things, or you made these changes that like threw us off on this tangent. So once I could be present and let go of the blame, shame, and guilt of the past and let go of the anxiety and fear of the future and really just sit and be present, and be emotionally available for whatever comes that day. And for we'll just say my frame to not change. She could walk in the door and be happy. That doesn't mean I get to be happy that day. If she walks in and sad, it doesn't mean I try to fix it and make her happy. To just be able to sit with the emotion and sit with the messiness and the rawness and the vulnerability that life throws at you. I mean, we go through tons of emotions and we have good days and bad days. And for me, the emotional safety aspect was just learning how to show up present. And it really didn't hit me. We'll pull this over real quick. I don't know if you can see this, but very hard to see. But there is a note from my daughter. And maybe it was I think she wrote it in April after like a very bad date, like a date that I didn't show up well. I think we went to like a Nikki Glaser concert and the date didn't go that well. And I was like, man, I showed up awful on that date. Like I was defensive, I was reactive, I was everything that I've been learning. Like this was when I said that growth isn't linear, I was like, this is one of those days where it's like, scrap that day and start over because this is bad. But the next day, my daughter wrote that letter to me, and it says, you are the best. It might seem you always need to do something for me, but you don't, because just being you is perfect. And I was a 6-year-old at that time. So I framed it. I put it on my desk. It's on the background of my phone, wherever my phone is. And I screenshotted it, and I said, and I even told my wife at the time, I was like, all she wants is my presence. And she was like, man, there's a lot of me in that kid. And that's when it kind of clicked. Like, this work isn't about just your relationship with your wife. It's not about just your relationship with your kids. Like, as I've been able to be present and vulnerable and be there for others, um, my relationships with friends, my relationship with my mom, I'll have a 3 hour conversation with my mom now and just be fully engaged. And that would, a year ago, that would never, never, ever happen. Um, and the friendships, there's no more, oh, did you see the Dodgers score? And then it's the weather or whatever surface level conversation you want to have. Those friendships have either turned into deep friendships or they're gone. I don't have time for the surface level BS anymore. Um, I just want to be present and accountable and there for people, because life isn't easy. We're all going through something, and until you're like really present and in it, I didn't realize how many men or how many marriages or how many dads were like, yeah, I don't connect with my kid either. Like, I put a post about my daughter and like this look she gave me and wrote a whole post about it. And I probably had, I want to say 15 to 20 dads reach out to me, and they're like, what programs have you done? What books have you read? So there's
Yeah.
so many men out there that like want to have that bond with their kids. Um, and I always had a great one with my son and my two older daughters, but my younger daughter, the one who wrote that note, until I learned emotional safety, until I learned how to connect with her, and how to be present and know that I could just be there for her, whatever emotion, whatever silly things, whatever sadness, great, like happy days, I'm just there. And she feels comfortable enough to just lay it all out there and know that I'm not going to react anymore and I'm just going to be there for her. Like, our relationship has bloomed and flourished more than I could ever ask for. And it, like, I get a little emotional about it because, I mean, that's, for me, the emotional inheritance that I'm going to pass down to my kids after going through this work, despite any of the status, despite any of the accolades or awards I do at work or marriage or anything, like that emotional inheritance that they're going to get, because I was brave enough to sit and do the work. That's going to be the legacy I leave with them. And it's so rewarding.
That's beautiful. Yeah, there's this concept of being a human being, not a human doing, that I think is really important to kind of grasp. And I think you're spot on that it kind of comes from a place of low self-worth when you feel like you have to perform and achieve and earn, because you don't feel that who you are is inherently lovable. And so you have to do all these performative things or these actions or tasks or, yeah, like you said, performance to earn the love of your partner. And when you recognize and you heal that relationship with yourself first and foremost, that sometimes just holding space for a partner, meaning we're not judging, we're not reacting, we're getting curious, or we're not saying it all, we're just letting them vent. From a woman's perspective, because our hormones shift so much and we can't always tell what that is, especially if you're on birth control, because that hijacks your cycle. So you can't even track what day it is. So you wake up and you don't know why you feel anxious or you're more angsty. Like for me, I can tell where I'm at in my cycle based on how I react to a comment section. Some days I'm like, tempt me with a fucking good time, bro. Other times I'm like, I can't be in the comment section because I internalize all of it and I feel sad and I want to hide and I want to run away. And it's not that there are any more polarizing comments, right? They're all kind of the same, some angsty, some great, some not so great. But that's my own barometer right now. And it's when we have a man that when we're trying to navigate our own emotional world to see what is truth, what is our gut versus what is hormones kind of skewing how we're viewing things. When we have a man that is hypersensitive to going on that cycle with us, we tend to numb and suppress our emotions because we don't want to go on that journey with you or it explodes. Right. So my ex-husband we were very codependent. And so when I was having a bad day, now he's having a bad day, no matter what kind of day he had. When I was upset about something, he made sure he was even more upset. So the attention would be on him. And so over time, not recognizing this was what was happening, I suppressed everything and I numbed it with food. So I was 40 pounds heavier in my marriage because I didn't know how to handle all of that anxiety and all of what I was holding in. So worried that one bad day for me would mean he'd do something stupid or he'd start yelling or screaming at me. And so it became this lack of emotional safety because I couldn't have an emotion that didn't have some sort of effect on somebody else. And while that's not to give permission for women to use men as punching bags emotionally, it's also I can't gauge what's normal right now versus what's my hormones? And I remember when I started therapy, just being like, I can tell where I'm at in my cycle based on how pissed off I am at my husband, right? Or how happy I am with him. So that was like almost a weird barometer of, okay, these are hormones. This is not truth for our relationship or our marriage. And so that being that rock that we talk about men being, that a woman's emotions and her waves of emotion can crash against and feel safe to, is part of that emotional safety, where you can allow her to process out. Because when women can process out by mainly way of talking, we're not nagging, we're not harping on you. It's our external processing of what is the real threat we're experiencing, because our body's sensing a threat. Sometimes we're going to think it's you, but oftentimes if we can process this out verbally, we actually get to the root of what the issue is, which I'm hungry, I'm tired, I, have been working too much, or, I haven't slept well in the past 3 years because we have young children, right? We start to get to the root of the issue. And that's where we could use support in solving whatever the issue is. But men oftentimes hear the complaints start up, they go into their defense mechanism and either shut down, walk away, yell at her, try to shut her down, or solve for whatever the surface first issue she comes up with, and then can't figure out for the life of them why they keep cycling these same arguments. We've already solved for that. We already came up with a solution. We already fixed it. Why do you keep bringing it up? You're nagging. It's because we haven't actually gotten to what the root of the issue is. And I love that you shared that your partner is not somebody to fix, and it's not your responsibility to fix her. That part of that is also holding a woman accountable for her behavior. If her hormones are creating destruction in the relationship, or she doesn't have the communication skills to be vulnerable and she just attacks, we draw the boundaries if that's not acceptable. That may create more problems. Great. We still don't change the boundaries. This is not how we move forward. So I've loved your journey so much, and I love that I've gotten to see kind of behind the scenes. Let me kind of ask you this as kind of a final wrap up. If you were
a quick question for you.
Go for it.
When you said you kind of suppressed during your marriage, would there also be a state where you could people please? Like you come home and you fake happiness to get happiness, or where you're starting to people please, or you're being the masculine in the relationship and you're like, I could realize that if I show up calm and happy and grounded, I'll get the same reaction out of my husband. Because I feel like a lot of the polarity shift happens too when the man's not able to kind of be that ground or that safety net, that it'll either turn to people pleasing, where you'll start doing things to try to control his emotion, or I'm just curious in your experience.
Yeah. The way that I used to frame it was I put him in an emotional bubble, especially kind of the last few years of my marriage. There were instances where I was really afraid of him in certain ways, and never afraid that he was going to physically hurt me, but just some things that I was afraid of. And so I started over functioning in that, meaning he is just going to be in his bubble and play his video games in the garage, and I will handle the kids, and I will handle the house, and I will work, and he doesn't have to work, and I will do everything. So yeah, I went fully into a masculine energy and doing and action and protecting, trying to not dysregulate him. So that's where I started taking on my quote unquote responsibility for his emotions. This is where my codependency reared its ugly head in my enabling of this. I didn't hold him accountable. I didn't say this is no longer acceptable. I remember my therapist advised us not to go to couples therapy until he was in his own individual therapy, because she was like, if you go, he's just going to hold his own line. He's not going to have anywhere to process what comes up. And so you're just going to overfunction in that environment as well. So we had, for like a good probably year or two when things were not going great, him being resistant to going because he only wanted to go to couples therapy. He didn't want to go to individual therapy. When I finally caved in of like, okay, let's go to couples, then that individual therapist or that couples therapist said, we actually need to do individual work with him, and he has some trauma stuff he's got to work through. And it was right during that time that we had our first separation, because part of his challenges were the noise level of our children. My daughter was 7 months old and my son was 3. So that's the first.
Kind of noisy at that age.
Part of that, and again, I don't want to disclose too much about him, but
yeah,
he had some PTSD that was tied to the noise level of kids. And so we moved out of the house so he could go through EMDR and some intensive therapy. And it was helpful for a season. We ended up moving back in together right before COVID. And then COVID hit, and now we're all in the same house with the noise level of the kids. He doesn't have his normal coping mechanisms. He can't go to therapy. So it is kind of interesting to think, like, if COVID had never happened, or at least at the time it did, could he have had a little bit more time to
Yeah.
implement, right? For him to be regulated, for him to be integrated in the house, for trust to be rebuilt. We just didn't, the things happened the way they did. We moved across the country away from our support system to Tennessee, and then things quickly devolved from there.
I think your therapist is spot on though. Because most of the men that have gone through the work with me, they would welcome couples therapy now. They're
Yeah.
like, I would show up so good in couples therapy now
Yeah.
versus a year ago. So I think once you do the work, like most of the men are excited about couples therapy. They're like,
Yeah.
oh yes, an outlet. Like this is somewhere where I could rebuild trust and rebuild safety. And they have the tools to show up to that couples therapy and really make progress on the relationship. Where if you haven't handled all your own inner stuff, you're going to show up in the couples therapy the same way you're showing up in the relationship. Like you don't have the tools to go in there and learn it.
Yeah. Well, or it's like an hour session. You're just starting to get into the crux of it at like 50 minutes. And they're like, okay, well, let's wrap up for today. And then you go home in that raw state without, again, the skills and tools. And I think that's a big difference between me as a coach versus therapy is I am teaching skills and tools, probably more so than I'm digging into the repeated arguments. Now, I don't know most couple therapists. I've only had a couple of my own sessions and heard other people's sessions. But where I find couples therapy kind of skews things when individually they're not doing their own work is that it becomes this almost like the couples therapist is the person who has to choose the side. And one party always feels they're not being heard or they're being attacked. And so it feels imbalanced. And then they don't want to go anymore. And nothing gets resolved. And so then it's the other person's left feeling like they gave up or we've run out of options. And yeah, so when I work with couples, it's not therapy, but it is, we do one session together, make sure they're both comfortable. We explain what the journey is going to be. The next session is getting into their individual stuff and giving them individually nervous system regulation tools. And then we come back together of how do we start to implement these tools that you've learned individually in a common argument you have or in a disconnect. And let's start there. And then we kind of go from there. But yeah, it's the skill development, I think, is the biggest component where couples disconnect because they're fighting over their defense mechanisms. And until we put those down, we're not actually getting to vulnerability where connection lives.
Yeah. And they're just bringing up old wounds, which bring up old patterns and old habits and old beliefs. And you go back into your old defensiveness or arguing or letting ego and pride get in the way. And you want to win the conversation with the therapist so that she sides with you.
Yeah.
So it's just,
you don't have to do the work.
You don't have to, but if you do the work going into it, you're like, okay, we're attacking this problem together. We're in it together. And you approach those therapy sessions with love and compassion and empathy of like, we're not the problem. It's these skills that we don't have or this that we don't have. So now you're attacking the marital problem versus each other. And I think it's just so much more valuable to do the work before. So I don't blame your therapist for saying that because I really do think doing the work before you go into a setting like that will magnify your experience when going into it.
I think it's still a challenge for me. And this is just like my own therapy here. It's still a challenge for me to have boundaries with him, even though we've been divorced for 4 years and like we have really nothing to do with each other personally other than when we co-parent. But I still am trying to protect him because that was very much what felt safest during my marriage is protect him at all costs and his fragile emotions or ego or whatever stories I created. And still I feel that way, probably because I don't have a relationship with him in any other sense. So I haven't learned what he's capable of as far as like his own regulation. I know he's doing better than he used to. But to me, the cost or that maybe it's some trauma that I have from some situations we went through, I'm still protective of him, even when he's doing things that are wildly not okay. I don't know. Thanks for that. I'm going to have to unpack that and journal that some. I'll debrief with you later. Okay. So speak to the Paul of, let's say 5 years ago, who was just starting on this journey. And he recognizes that there's kind of some patterns or he can't quite understand himself. What would be maybe one piece of advice to get him to put the ego away, to feel comfortable in reaching out for help, whether it's therapy, whether through it's a coach, whether through me? What would be one thing that you can make him feel comfortable enough in taking that first step of getting support?
I think for the men that are looking to get into the work, if you could find other men who you can share vulnerably with, who you can be open with, you'll start to realize that you're not alone. And I think that was the biggest part of some of the men's program I was in, is having the community, to realize you could jump in and do the work and not be afraid. Because we're all afraid to do the work, and it's a lot. It's a lot of hours. I mean, at a certain point in time, I was putting in 4 or 5 hours a day, and I was like, wow, this is like, I need to get back to work, or I need to do this. But I think getting that close group of men around you, surrounding yourself with 5 or 10 great people, that you can bounce things off of and share with, it'll allow you to start to get comfortable to share. And then that'll allow you to start working with other people. And if you can build a great relationship with a coach, or some trust with a coach, then it really starts to, now you get the toolbox that comes along with being vulnerable and having that group of men to bounce things off of. But I know 5 years ago, it was like, how are you? I'm great. Good. How are the kids? Good. Those were our conversations. And then today it's like, I talked to somebody who worked for me for 5 years, and I was telling them, kind of the journey and the path that I've been going through, and my dedication towards family and fatherhood, and really working on the relationship with my kids. And he was like, oh yeah, my wife and I separated for 18 months and we got back together, and I'm going through this growth journey also. And now it's like, what? I've known you. Like, you worked for me when you were going through that separation. I was at your wedding. Like, how do I not know this? So that's what I'm saying. If you're not being vulnerable with the men closest to you, and you don't have that support group of friends around you, I think it's hard to do the work, because you feel alone and you feel scared. But once you realize there's so many people going through some of the battles, and that's why that Facebook post about the closeness with my daughter, I realized, I'm like, man, only 300 people saw this post, and 15 reached out about they want to have a closer connection with their kids. Like, that's amazing. Like, that's a high percentage of people out of 300 people that want that connection and want that closeness. But it really comes down to who you surround yourself with. Yeah. And if you surround yourself with good people who are willing to be vulnerable and share and be open and have an authentic, deep relationship, it paves the way for the work that would have been done. And 5 years ago, I didn't have that. Not saying I didn't have close friends. I just didn't feel comfortable in sharing with them, like super deep stuff.
Love that. That's great advice. Gee, I wonder where there's a program like that. Maybe helpful. Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, all right, Paul. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story and being so open about it. I know it'll impact a lot of people. And so for me to thank you for coming on and being brave enough to share.
Awesome. Keep doing your work. Like I said, every person you can help, every family, every relationship, it's worth it. I think that's what you do is very healing for the world. And it's, like I said, if it helps one person, 1,000 people, 1,000,000 people, whoever gets to hear the story and work on their relationships with their kids, their families, their friends, it'll make all the difference in the world. So kudos to you for trying to get out there and help the world be a better place.
I'm going to listen to that on the days I feel angsty and don't want to go on social media. But I appreciate you, Paul. If this episode hit home with you, these are the types of conversations we have weekly inside of my program, Healthy Men-tality. It's a 12-week coaching program for men, learning how human behavior comes to be, how something happens outside of you, like your partner complaining about something, and how you perceive it as an attack when really it's just a request for connection, how your emotions come to play, what even are emotions. We break it down in a real logical way where you understand, hey, that feeling I'm having is actually hormones and my heart racing, not actually something that I need to be scared of as a threat to my livelihood or my well-being. We talk about how to stop people pleasing, what codependency is, and how it shows up in your relationships. We talk about how childhood affects your adult relationships, how our nervous systems are wired in childhood to be attracted towards things that we label as love based on a childhood definition of love, which may not be working out for you. We talk about how to define masculinity in your own terms so that you can get a definition of what a man is and how you define being a healthy man and getting your own qualities and traits so that that can inform the next right step for you to intentionally take to become the man you desire to be, and even what a healthy definition of love is. Because again, we may have a broken definition of love based on childhood that probably not serving us as adults. And then finally, what relational leadership is, how to have healthy conflict so it actually creates connection rather than destruction. We go through nervous system skills and tools. These are what makes it massively different than anything like therapy, where you talk about your problems a lot. You're actually learning skills and tools in real time weekly on how to start to regulate your nervous system more, whether it's taking a pause, certain breathing patterns, and getting into repairing and healing deep-seated trauma and stuff that's stuck in your nervous system and repressing all those emotions by way of what's called somatic breathwork. This ain't box breathing, y'all. This is very intense work, but it is designed to help you understand what a regulated nervous system feels like that isn't dependent on anything outside of you changing. It is massively powerful. We have plenty of episodes that cover that if you want to learn more about it. So if you're interested in learning more about the Healthy Mentality program and you feel like that might be the next right step for you, that you've tried therapy, that you've tried all the podcasts and the TikToks and it's just not seeing a change, or why maybe you can logically understand what's going on, or you can cognitively kind of get there, but you still don't feel any better, that is what Healthy Mentality is for. So head on over to unblockyourbs.com/healthymen. We'll link it up in the show notes. That's where you can learn more about the program, hear from other men inside the program, and apply to become a member inside of Healthy Mentality. All right, until next time, have a good one.